Investigations into Phenomenology and the Theory of Knowledge, Part I, Volume 2, Part I of the German editions. Introduction. I. The necessity of phenomenological investigations as a preliminary to the epistemological criticism and clarification of pure logic. The necessity that we should begin logic with linguistic discussions has often been acknowledged from the standpoint of a logical technology. Language, we read in Mill, is evidently one of the principal instruments or helps of thought, and any imperfection in the instrument, or in the mode of employing it, is confessedly liable, still more than in almost any other art, to confuse and impede the process, and destroy all ground of confidence in the result. For a mind not previously versed in the meaning and right use of the various kinds of words, to attempt the study of methods of philosophizing, would be as if someone should attempt to become an astronomical observer, having never learned to adjust the focal distance of his optical instruments so as to see distinctly. A deeper ground for this necessity of beginning logic with linguistic analysis is, however, seen by Mill in the fact that it would not otherwise be possible to investigate the meaning of propositions, a matter which stands at the threshold of logical science itself. This last remark of our distinguished thinker indicates a point of view regulative for pure logic, and, be it noted, for pure logic treated as a philosophical discipline. I assume accordingly that no one will think it enough to develop pure logic merely in the manner of our mathematical disciplines, as a growing system of propositions having a naively factual validity, without also striving to be philosophically clear in regard to these same propositions, without, that is, gaining insight into the essence of the modes of cognition which come into play in their utterance and in the ideal possibility of applying such propositions, together with all such conferments of sense and objective validities as are essentially constituted therein. Linguistic discussions are certainly among the philosophically indispensable preparations for the building of pure logic. Only by their aid can the true objects of logical research, and, following thereon, the essential species and differentiae of such objects, be refined to a clarity that excludes all misunderstanding. We are not here concerned with grammatical discussions, empirically conceived and related to some historically given language. We are concerned with discussions of a most general sort which cover the wider sphere of an objective theory of knowledge and, closely linked with this last, the pure phenomenology of the experiences of thinking and knowing. This phenomenology, like the more inclusive pure phenomenology of experiences in general, has, as its exclusive concern, experiences intuitively seizable and analyzable in the pure generality of their essence, not experiences empirically perceived and treated as real facts, as experiences of human or animal experience in the phenomenal world that we posit as an empirical fact. This phenomenology must bring to pure expression, must describe in terms of their essential concepts and their governing formulae of essence, the essences which directly make themselves known in intuition, and the connections which have their roots purely in such essences. Each such statement of essence is an a priori statement in the highest sense of the word. This sphere we must explore in preparation for the epistemological criticism and clarification of pure logic. Our investigations will therefore all move within it. Pure phenomenology represents a field of neutral researches, in which several sciences have their roots. It is, on the one hand, an ancillary to psychology conceived as an empirical science. Proceeding in purely intuitive fashion, it analyzes and describes in their essential generality, in the specific guise of a phenomenology of thought and knowledge, the experiences of presentation, judgment and knowledge, experiences which, treated as classes of real events in the natural context of zoological reality, receive a scientific probing at the hands of empirical psychology. Phenomenology, on the other hand, lays bare the sources from which the basic concepts and ideal laws of pure logic flow, and back to which they must once more be traced, so as to give them all the clearness and distinctness needed for an understanding, and for an epistemological critique, of pure logic. The epistemological or phenomenological groundwork of pure logic involves very hard, but also surpassingly important researches. To revert to what we set forth as the tasks of pure logic in the first volume of these investigations, we have taken it upon us to give firm clarity to notions and laws on which the objective meaning and theoretical unity of all knowledge is dependent. To elucidation of the aims of such investigations, all theoretical research, though by no means solely conducted in acts of verbal expression or complete statement, nonetheless terminates in such statement. Only in this form can truth, and in particular the truth of theory, become an abiding possession of science, a documented, ever available treasure for knowledge and advancing research. Whatever the connection of thought with speech may be, whether or not the appearance of our final judgments in the form of verbal pronouncements has a necessary grounding in essence, it is at least plain that judgments stemming from higher intellectual regions, and in particular from the regions of science, could barely arise without expression_n. The objects which pure logic seeks to examine are, in the first instance, therefore given to it in grammatical clothing. Or, more precisely, they come before us embedded in concrete mental states which further function either as a meaning intention or meaning fulfillment of certain verbal expressions, in the latter case intuitively illustrating, or intuitively providing evidence for, our meaning, and forming a phenomenological unity with such expressions. In these complex phenomenological unities the logician must pick out the components that interest him, the characters of the acts, first of all, in which logical presentation, judgment and knowledge are consummated. He must pursue the descriptive analysis of such act types to the extent that this helps the progress of his properly logical tasks. We cannot straightway leap from the fact that theory realizes itself in certain mental states, and has instances in them, to the seemingly obvious truth that such mental states must count as the primary object of our logical researches. The pure logician is not primarily or properly interested in the psychological judgment, the concrete mental phenomenon, but in the logical judgment, the identical asserted meaning, which is one over against manifold, descriptively quite different. Judgment experiences. 3 There is naturally, in the singular experiences which correspond to this ideal unity, a certain pervasive common feature, but since the concern of the pure logician is not with the concrete instance, but with its corresponding idea, its abstractly apprehended universal, he has, it would seem, no reason to leave the field of abstraction, nor to make concrete experiences the theme of his probing interest, instead of ideas. Even if phenomenological analysis of concrete thought experiences does not fall within the true home ground of pure logic, it nonetheless is indispensable to the advance of purely logical research. For all that is logical must be given in fully concrete fashion, if, as an object of research, it is to be made our own, and if we are to be able to bring to self-evidence the a priori laws which have their roots in it. What is logical is first given us in imperfect shape, the concept as a more or less wavering meaning, the law, built out of concepts, as a more or less wavering assertion. We do not therefore lack logical insights, but grasp the pure law with self-evidence, and see how it has its base in the pure forms of thought. Such self-evidence depends, however, on the verbal meanings which come alive in the actual passing of the judgment regarding the law. Unnoticed equivocation may permit the subsequent substitution of other concepts beneath our words, and an appeal on behalf of an altered proposition or meaning may quite readily, but wrongly, be made on the self-evidence previously experienced. It is also possible, conversely, that a misinterpretation based on equivocation may distort the sense of the propositions of pure logic, perhaps turning them into empirical, psychological propositions, and may tempt us to abandon previously experienced self-evidence and the unique significance of all that belongs to pure logic. It is not therefore enough that the ideas of logic, and the pure laws set up with them, should be given in such a manner. Our great task is now to bring the ideas of logic, the logical concepts and laws, to epistemological clarity and definiteness. Here phenomenological analysis must begin. Logical concepts, as valid thought unities, must have their origin in intuition. They must arise out of an ideational intuition founded on certain experiences, and must admit of indefinite reconfirmation, and of recognition of their self-identity, on the reperformance of such abstraction. Otherwise put, we can absolutely not rest content with mere words, i.e. with a merely symbolic understanding of words, such as we first have when we reflect on the sense of the laws for concepts, judgments, truths etc., together with their manifold specifications, which are set up in pure logic. Meanings inspired only by remote, confused, inauthentic intuitions, if by any intuitions at all, are not enough, we must go back to the things themselves. We desire to render self-evident in full-fledged intuitions that what is here given in actually performed abstractions is what the word meanings in our expression of the law really and truly stand for. In the practice of cognition we strive to arouse dispositions in ourselves which will keep our meanings unshakably the same, which will measure them sufficiently often against the mark set by reproducible intuitions or by an intuitive carrying out of our abstraction. Intuitive illustration of the shifting meanings which attach to the same term in differing propositional contexts likewise convinces us of the fact of equivocation. It becomes evident to us that what a word means in this or that case has its fulfillment in essentially different intuitive moments or patterns, or in essentially different general notions. By distinguishing among concepts confounded by us, and by suitably modifying our terminology, we then likewise achieve a desired clearness and distinctness for our logical propositions. The phenomenology of the logical experiences aims at giving us a sufficiently wide descriptive, though not empirically psychological, understanding of these mental states and their indwelling sense, as will enable us to give fixed meanings to all the fundamental concepts of logic. Such meanings will be clarified both by going back to the analytically explored connections between meaning intentions and meaning fulfillments, and also by making their possible function in cognition intelligible and certain. They will be such meanings, in short, as the interest of pure logic itself requires, as well as the interest, above all, of epistemological insight into the essence of this discipline. Fundamental logical and noetic concepts have, up to this time, been quite imperfectly clarified. Countless equivocations beset them, some so pernicious, so hard to track down, and to keep consistently separate, that they yield the main ground for the very backward state of pure logic and theory of knowledge. We must of course admit that many conceptual differentiations and circumscriptions of the sphere of pure logic can become evident to the natural attitude without phenomenological analysis. The relevant logical acts are carried out and adequately fitted to their fulfilling intuitions, though there is no reflection on the phenomenological situation itself. What is most completely evident can, however, be confused with something else. What it apprehends can be misconstrued. Its assured directives can be rejected. Clarifying researches are especially needed to explain our by no means chance inclination to slip unwittingly from an objective to a psychological attitude, and to mix up two bodies of data distinguishable in principle however much they may be essentially related, and to be deceived by psychological misconstructions and misinterpretations of the objects of logic. Such clarifications can, by their nature, only be achieved within a phenomenological theory of the essences of our thought and knowledge experiences, with continuous regard to the things essentially meant by, and so belonging to the latter, in the precise manners in which those things are as such shown forth, represented etc. Psychologism can only be radically overcome by a pure phenomenology, a science infinitely removed from psychology as the empirical science of the mental attributes and states of animal realities. In our sphere, too, the sphere of pure logic, such a phenomenology alone offers us all the necessary conditions for a finally satisfactory establishment of the totality of basic distinctions and insights. It alone frees us from the strong temptation, at first inevitable, since rooted in grounds of essence, to turn the logically objective into the psychological. The above-mentioned motives for phenomenological analysis have an obvious and essential connection with those which spring from basic questions of epistemology. For if these questions are taken in the widest generality, i.e. in the formal generality which abstracts from all matter of knowledge, they form part of a range of questions involved in the full clarification of the idea of pure logic. We have, on the one hand, the fact that all thought and knowledge have as their aim objects or states of affairs, which they putatively hit in the sense that the being in itself of these objects and states is supposedly shown forth, and made an identifiable item, in a multitude of actual or possible meanings, or acts of thought. We have, further, the fact that all thought is ensouled by a thought form which is subject to ideal laws, laws circumscribing the objectivity or ideality of knowledge in general. These facts, I maintain, eternally provoke questions like, how are we to understand the fact that the intrinsic being of objectivity becomes presented, apprehended in knowledge, and so ends up by becoming subjective? What does it mean to say that the object has being in itself, and is given in knowledge? How can the ideality of the universal qua concept or law enter the flux of real mental states and become an epistemic possession of the thinking person? What does the ade equator reiet intellectus mean in various cases of knowledge, according as what we apprehend and know is individual or universal, a fact or a law etc.? These and similar questions can, it is plain, not be separated from the above-mentioned questions regarding the clarification of pure logic, since the task of clarifying such logical ideas as concept and object, truth and proposition, fact and law etc., inevitably leads on to these same questions. We should in any case have to tackle them so that the essence of the clarification aimed at in phenomenological analyses should not itself be left obscure. 3. The difficulties of pure phenomenological analysis. The difficulties of clearing up the basic concepts of logic are a natural consequence of the extraordinary difficulties of strict phenomenological analysis. These are in the main the same whether our immanent analysis aims at the pure essence of experiences, all empirical facticity and individuation being excluded, or treats experiences from an empirical, psychological standpoint. Psychologists usually discuss such difficulties when they consider introspection as a source of our detailed psychological knowledge, not properly however, but in order to draw a false antithesis between introspection and outer perception. The source of all such difficulties lies in the unnatural direction of intuition and thought which phenomenological analysis requires. Instead of becoming lost in the performance of acts built intricately on one another, and instead of, as it were, naively positing the existence of the objects intended in their sense and then going on to characterize them, or of assuming such objects hypothetically, of drawing conclusions from all this etc., we must rather practice reflection, i.e. make these acts themselves, and their immanent meaning content, our objects. When objects are intuited, thought of, theoretically pondered on, and thereby given to us as actualities in certain ontic modalities, we must direct our theoretical interest away from such objects, not posit them as realities as they appear or hold in the intentions of our acts. These acts, contrariwise, though hitherto not objective, must now be made objects of apprehension and of theoretical assertion. We must deal with them in new acts of intuition and thinking, we must analyze and describe them in their essence, we must make them objects of empirical or ideational thought. Here we have a direction of thought running counter to deeply ingrained habits which have been steadily strengthened since the dawn of mental development. Hence the well-nigh ineradicable tendency to slip out of a phenomenological thought stance into one that is straightforwardly objective, or to substitute for mental acts, or for their appearances or meanings immanent in them, characters which, in a naive performance of such acts, were attributed to their objects. Hence, 2. The tendency to treat whole classes of genuinely subsistent objects, for example ideas, since these may be evidently given to us in ideating intuitions, as phenomenological constituents of presentations of them. A much discussed difficulty, one which seems to threaten in principle all possible imminent description of mental acts or indeed all phenomenological treatment of essences, lies in the fact that when we pass over from naively performed acts to an attitude of reflection, or when we perform acts proper to such reflection, our former acts necessarily undergo change. How can we rightly assess the nature and extent of such change? How indeed can we know anything whatever about it, whether as a fact or as a necessity of essence? In addition to this difficulty of reaching firm results, capable of being self-evidently re-identified on many occasions, we have the further difficulty of stating such results, of communicating them to others. Completely self-evident truths of essence, established by the most exact analysis, must be expounded by way of expressions whose rich variety does not compensate for the fact that they only fit familiar natural objects, while the experiences in which such objects become constituted for consciousness, can be directly referred to only by way of a few highly ambiguous words such as sensation, perception, presentation, etc. One has, further, to employ expressions which stand for what is intentional in such acts, for the object to which they are directed, since it is, in fact, impossible to describe referential acts without using expressions which recur to the things to which such acts refer. One then readily forgets that such subsidiarily described objectivity, which is necessarily introduced into almost all phenomenological description, has undergone a change of sense, in virtue of which it now belongs to the sphere of phenomenology. If we ignore such difficulties, others emerge concerned with the persuasive communication of our resultant insights to others. These insights can be tested and confirmed only by persons well trained in the ability to engage in pure description in the unnatural attitude of reflection, trained in short to allow phenomenological relations to work upon them in full purity. Such purity means that we must keep out the falsifying intrusion of all assertions based on the naive acceptance and assessment of objects, whose existence has been posited in the acts now receiving phenomenological treatment. It likewise prohibits any other going beyond whatever is essential and proper to such acts, any application to them of naturalistic interpretations and assertions. It forbids us, i.e., to set them up as psychological realities, even in an indefinitely general or exemplary fashion, as the states of mind endowed beings of any sort whatsoever. The capacity for such researches is not readily come by, nor can it be achieved or replaced by, for example, the most elaborate of trainings in experimental psychology. Serious as are the difficulties standing in the way of a pure phenomenology in general, and of the phenomenology of the logical experiences in particular, they are by no means such as to make the whole attempt to overcome them appear hopeless. Resolute cooperation among a generation of research workers, conscious of their goal and dedicated to the main issue, would, I think, suffice to decide the most important questions in the field, those concerned with its basic constitution. Here we have a field of attainable discoveries, fundamentally involved in the possibility of a scientific philosophy. Such discoveries have indeed nothing dazzling about them, they lack any obviously useful relation to practice or to the fulfillment of higher emotional needs. They also lack any imposing apparatus of experimental methodology, through which experimental psychology has gained so much credit and has built up such a rich force of cooperative workers. For it is essential to keep in mind the grammatical side of our logical experiences. Analytic phenomenology, needed by the logician in his preparatory laying of foundations, is concerned, among other things, with presentations, and with them primarily, it is, more precisely, concerned with those presentations to which expression has been given. In the complex objects of its study, its primary interest attaches to the experiences lying behind mere expressions, experiences which perform roles either of meaning intention or of meaning fulfillment. It cannot, however, quite ignore the sensuous linguistic side of its complex objects, the element of mere expression in them, nor the way in which this element is associated with the meaning that ensouls it. Everyone knows how readily and how unnoticeably an analysis of meaning can be led astray by grammatical analysis. Since the direct analysis of meaning is, however, difficult, we may welcome each aid, however imperfect, that indirectly anticipates its results, but grammatical analysis is even more important in virtue of the errors its use promotes when it replaces a true analysis of meaning, than for any positive aid. Rough reflection on our thoughts and their verbal expression, conducted by us without special schooling, and often needed for the practical ends of thinking, suffice to indicate a certain parallelism between thinking and speaking. We all know that words mean something, and that, generally speaking, different words express different meanings. If we could regard such a correspondence as perfect, and as given a priori, and as one particularly in which the essential categories of meaning had perfect mirror images in the categories of grammar, a phenomenology of linguistic forms would include a phenomenology of the meaning experiences, experiences of thinking, judging, etc., and meaning analysis would, so to speak, coincide with grammatical analysis. Deep reflection is not, however, needed to show that a parallelism satisfying such far-reaching demands has as little foundation in grounds of essence as it obtains in fact. Grammatically relevant distinctions of meaning are at times essential, at times contingent, according as the practical aims of speech dictate peculiar forms for essential or contingent differences of meaning. The latter are merely such as have a frequent occurrence in human intercourse. It is well known, however, that differentiation of expressions does not merely depend on differences of meaning. I need point only to shades of meaning, or to aesthetic tendencies which fight against any bare uniformity of expression, or against discord in speech sound or rhythm, and so demand an abundant store of available synonyms. The rough concomitances among verbal and thought differences, and particularly among forms of words and thoughts, makes us naturally tend to seek logical distinctions behind expressed grammatical distinctions. It is, therefore, an important matter for logic that the relation between expression and meaning should be made analytically clear. We should perceive clearly that, in order to decide whether a distinction should, in a given case, count as logical or merely grammatical, we must go back from vague acts of meaning to the correspondingly clear, articulate ones, acts saturated with the fullness of exemplary intuition in which their meaning is fulfilled. It is not enough to have the common knowledge, easily garnered from suitable examples, that grammatical differences need not coincide with logical ones. The common knowledge that such distinctions do not always go hand in hand, that languages, in other words, express material differences of meaning, widely used in communication, in forms as pervasive as the fundamental logical differences having their a priori roots in the general essence of meanings, such common knowledge may open the way to a dangerous radicalism. The field of logical forms may be unduly restricted. A wide range of logically significant forms may be cast forth as merely grammatical, only a few may be kept, such as suffice to leave some content to traditional syllogizing. Brentano's attempted reform of formal logic, valuable as it no doubt still is, plainly suffered from this exaggeration. Only a complete clearing up of the essential phenomenological relations between expression and meaning, or between meaning intention and meaning fulfillment, can give us a firm middle stance, and can enable us to give the requisite clearness to the relations between grammatical and meaning analysis. 5. Statement of the main aims of the following analytical investigations. We accordingly pass to a series of analytic investigations which will clear up the constitutive ideas of a pure formal logic, investigations which relate in the first place to the pure theory of logical forms. Starting with the empirical connection between meaning experiences and expressions, we must try to find out what our variously ambiguous talk about expressing or meaning really amounts to. We must try to see what essential phenomenological or logical distinctions apply a priori to expressions, and how we may in essence describe, and may place in pure categories, the experiences, to deal first with the phenomenological side of expressions, that have an a priori fitness for the meaning function. We must find out how the presenting and judging achieved in such experience is done to their corresponding intuition, how they are illustrated, or perhaps confirmed or fulfilled, in the latter, or rendered evident by it, etc. It is not hard to see that investigations of such matters must precede all clarifications of the basic concepts and categories of logic. Among our introductory investigations we shall have to raise fundamental questions as to the acts, or, alternatively, the ideal meanings, which in logic pass under the name of presentations, Vorstellungen. It is important to clarify and prize apart the many concepts that the word presentation has covered, concepts in which the psychological, the epistemological and the logical are utterly confused. Similar analyses deal with the concept of judgment in the sense in which logic is concerned with it. So-called judgment theory neglects this task. It is in the main, in respect of its essential problems, a theory of presentation. We are naturally not interested in a psychological theory, but in a phenomenology of presentation and judgment experiences as delimited by our epistemological interests. As we probe the essence of the expressive experiences, we must also dig more deeply into their intentional subject matter, their objective intension's ideal sense, i.e. into the unity of its meaning and the unity of its object. We must, above all, dwell upon the enigmatic double sense or manner, the two-sided context, in which the same experience has a content, and the manner in which in addition to its real and proper content, an ideal, intentional content must and can dwell in it. Here also belong questions relating to the object-directedness or objectlessness of logical acts, to the sense of the distinction between intentional and true objects, to the clarification of the idea of truth in relation to the idea of judgmental self-evidence, to the clarification of the remaining, closely connected logical and noetic categories. These investigations in part cover the same ground as those dealing with the constitution of logical forms, to the extent, of course, that we settle questions as to the acceptance or rejection of putative logical forms, or doubts as to their logical or merely grammatical distinctness from forms already recognized, in the course of our clarification of form-giving, categorical concepts. We have thus vaguely indicated the range of problems to which the ensuing investigations will be oriented. These investigations make no claim to be exhaustive. Their aim is not to provide a logical system, but to do the initial spade work for a philosophical logic which will derive clearness from basic phenomenological sources. The path taken by such an analytic investigation will also naturally differ from those suitable to a final, systematic, logically ordered statement of established truth. 6 additional notes. Note 1. Our investigations will often inevitably take us beyond the narrow phenomenological sphere whose study is really required for giving direct evidence to the ideas of logic. This sphere is itself not given to us initially, but becomes delimited in the course of our investigation. We are, in particular, forced beyond this sphere of research when we prize apart the many confused concepts obscurely confounded in our understanding of logical terms, and when we find which of them are truly logical. Note 2. The phenomenological founding of logic involves the difficulty that we must, in our exposition, make use of all the concepts we are trying to clarify. This coincides with a certain wholly removable defect which affects the systematic course of our basic phenomenological and epistemological investigations. If a type of thought requires prior clarification, we should not make uncritical use of its terms or concepts in that clarification itself. But one should not expect that one should only be required to analyze such concepts critically, when the actual interconnection of one's logical materials has led up to them. Or, put differently, systematic clarification, whether in pure logic or any other discipline, would in itself seem to require a stepwise following out of the ordering of things, of the systematic interconnection in the science to be clarified. Our investigation can, however, only proceed securely if it repeatedly breaks with such systematic sequence, if it removes conceptual obscurities which threaten the course of investigation before the natural sequence of subject matters can lead up to such concepts. We search, as it were, in zigzag fashion, a metaphor all the more apt since the close interdependence of our various epistemological concepts leads us back again and again to our original analyses, where the new confirms the old, and the old the new. Note 3. If our sense of phenomenology has been grasped, and if it has not been given the current interpretation of an ordinary descriptive psychology, a part of natural science, then an objection, otherwise justifiable, will fall to the ground, an objection to the effect that all theory of knowledge, conceived as a systematic phenomenological clarification of knowledge, is built upon psychology. On this interpretation pure logic, treated by us as an epistemologically clarified, philosophical discipline, must in the end likewise rest upon psychology, if only upon its preliminary descriptive researches into intentional experiences. Why then so much heated resistance to psychologism? We naturally reply that if psychology is given its old meaning, phenomenology is not descriptive psychology, its peculiar pure description, its contemplation of pure essences on a basis of exemplary individual intuitions of experiences, often freely imagined ones, and its descriptive fixation of the contemplated essences into pure concepts, is no empirical, scientific description. It rather excludes the natural performance of all empirical, naturalistic, perceptions and positings. Statements of descriptive psychology regarding perceptions, judgments, feelings, volitions etc. use such names to refer to the real states of animal organisms in a real natural order, just as descriptive statements concerning physical states deal with happenings in a nature not imagined but real. All general statements have here a character of empirical generality, they hold for this nature. Phenomenology, however, does not discuss states of animal organisms, not even as belonging to a possible nature as such, but perceptions, judgments, feelings as such, and what pertains to them a priori with unlimited generality, as pure instances of pure species, of what may be seen through a purely intuitive apprehension of essence, whether generic or specific. Pure arithmetic likewise speaks of numbers, and pure geometry of spatial shapes, employing pure intuitions in their ideational universality. Not psychology, therefore, but phenomenology, underlies all clarifications in pure logic, and in all forms of rational criticism. Phenomenology has, however, a very different function as the necessary basis for every psychology that could with justification and in strictness be called scientific, just as pure mathematics, for example pure geometry and dynamics, is the necessary foundation for all exact natural science, any theory of empirical things in nature with their empirical forms, movements etc. Our essential insights into perceptions, volitions and other forms of experience will naturally hold also of the corresponding empirical states of animal organisms, as geometrical insights hold of spatial figures in nature. Translator's additional note for the above note 3 is a typical account of what Husserl had come to mean by phenomenology by the time that the second edition of the Logical Investigations was published in 1913. It replaces the following note, which indicates what he meant by the term when the first edition was published in 1901. Phenomenology is descriptive psychology. Epistemological criticism is therefore in essence psychology, or at least only capable of being built on a psychological basis. Pure logic therefore also rests on psychology. What then is the point of the whole battle against psychologism? The necessity of this sort of psychological foundation of pure eisegeik, i.e. a strictly descriptive one, cannot lead us into error regarding the mutual independence of the two sciences, logic and psychology. For pure description is merely a preparatory step towards theory, not theory itself. One and the same sphere of pure description can accordingly serve to prepare for very different theoretical sciences. It is not the full science of psychology that serves as a foundation for pure logic, but certain classes of descriptions which are the step preparatory to the theoretical researches of psychology. These insofar as they describe the empirical objects whose genetic connections the science wishes to pursue, also form the substrate for those fundamental abstractions in which logic seizes the essence of its ideal objects and connections with inward evidence. Since it is epistemologically of unique importance that we should separate the purely descriptive examination of the knowledge experience, disembarrassed of all theoretical psychological interests, from the truly psychological researches directed to empirical explanation and origins, it will be good if we rather speak of phenomenology than of descriptive psychology. It also recommends itself for the further reason that the expression descriptive psychology, as it occurs in the talk of many scientists, means the sphere of scientific psychological investigation, which is marked off by a methodological preference for inner experience and by an abstraction from all psychophysical explanation. 7. Freedom from presuppositions as a principle in epistemological investigations. An epistemological investigation that can seriously claim to be scientific must, it has often been emphasized, satisfy the principle of freedom from presuppositions. This principle, we think, only seeks to express the strict exclusion of all statements not permitting of a comprehensive phenomenological realization. Every epistemological investigation that we carry out must have its pure foundation in phenomenology. The theory that it aspires to, is no more than a thinking over, a coming to an evident understanding of, thinking and knowing as such, in their pure generic essence, of the specifications and forms that they essentially have, of the immanent structures that their objective relations involve, of the meaning of validity, justification, mediate and immediate evidence, and their opposites, as applied to such structures, of the parallel specifications of such ideas in relation to varying regions of possible objects of knowledge, of the clarified sense and role of the formal and material laws of thought seen in their a priori structural connections with the knowing consciousness, etc. If such a thinking over of the meaning of knowledge is itself to yield, not mere opinion, but the evident knowledge it strictly demands, it must be a pure intuition of essences, exemplarily performed on an actual given basis of experiences of thinking and knowing. That acts of thought at times refer to transcendent, even to non-existent and impossible objects, is not to the case. For such direction to objects, such presentation and meaning of what is not really, /1, part of the phenomenological makeup of our experiences, is a descriptive feature of the experiences in question, whose sense it should be possible to fix and clarify by considering the experiences themselves. In no other way would it be possible. We must keep apart from the pure theory of knowledge questions concerning the justifiability of accepting mental and physical realities which transcend consciousness, questions whether the statements of scientists regarding them are to be given a serious or unserious sense, questions whether it is justifiable or sensible to oppose a second, even more emphatically transcendent world, to the phenomenal nature with which science is correlated, and other similar questions. The question as to the existence and nature of the external world is a metaphysical question. The theory of knowledge, in generally clearing up the ideal essence and valid sense of cognitive thought, will of course deal with general questions regarding the possibility and manner of a knowledge or rational surmise about real objective things, things in principle transcending the experiences which know them, and regarding the norms which the true sense of such a knowledge requires. It will not enter upon the empirically oriented question as to whether we as men really can arrive at such knowledge from the data we actually have, nor will it attempt to realize such knowledge. On our view, theory of knowledge, properly described, is no theory. It is not science in the pointed sense of an explanatorily unified theoretical whole. Theoretical explanation means a never increased rendering intelligible of singular facts through general laws, and a never increased rendering intelligible of general laws through some fundamental law. In the realm of facts, our task is to know that what happens under given groups of circumstances, happens necessarily, i.e. according to natural laws. In the realm of the a priori, our task is to understand the necessity of specific, lower-level relationships in terms of comprehensive general necessities, and ultimately in terms of those most primitive, universal relational laws that we call axioms. The theory of knowledge has nothing to explain in this theoretical sense. It neither constructs deductive theories nor falls under any. This is clear enough if we consider the most general, the so to say formal theory of knowledge that came before us in our prolegomena as the philosophical completion of pure mathematics conceived in absolute width as including all a priori, categorical knowledge in the form of systematic theories. This theory of theories goes together with, and is illuminated by, a formal theory of knowledge which precedes all empirical theory, which precedes, therefore, all empirical knowledge of the real, all physical science on the one hand, and all psychology on the other, and of course all metaphysics. Its aim is not to explain knowledge in the psychological or psychophysical sense as a factual occurrence in objective nature, but to shed light on the idea of knowledge in its constitutive elements and laws. It does not try to follow up the real connections of coexistence and succession with which actual acts of knowledge are interwoven, but to understand the ideal sense of the specific connections in which the objectivity of knowledge may be documented. It endeavors to raise to clearness the pure forms and laws of knowledge by tracing knowledge back to an adequate fulfillment in intuition. This clearing up takes place in the framework of a phenomenology of knowledge, a phenomenology oriented, as we saw, to the essential structures of pure experiences and to the structures of sense, synvestandi, that belong to these. From the beginning, as at all later stages, its scientific statements involve not the slightest reference to real existence, no metaphysical, scientific and, above all, no psychological assertions can therefore occur among its premises. A purely phenomenological theory of knowledge naturally has an application to all naturally developed, and, in a good sense, naive sciences, which it transforms into philosophical sciences. It transforms them, in other words, into sciences which provide us with clarified, assured knowledge in every sense in which it is possible to desire the latter. As regards the sciences of reality, such epistemological clarification can as much be regarded as ascientific as a metaphysical evaluation. The investigations which follow aspire solely to such freedom from metaphysical, scientific and psychological presuppositions. No harm will of course be done by occasional side references which remain without effect on the content and character of one's analyses, nor by the many expository devices addressed to one's public, whose existence, like one's own, is not therefore presupposed by the content of one's investigations. Nor does one exceed one's prescribed limits if one starts, for example, from existent languages and discusses the merely communicative meaning of their many forms of expression, and so on. It is easily seen that the sense and the epistemological worth of the following analyses does not depend on the fact that there really are languages, and that men really make use of them in their mutual dealings, or that there really are such things as men and a nature, and that they do not merely exist in imagined, possible fashion. The real premises of our putative results must lie in propositions satisfying the requirement that what they assert permits of an adequate phenomenological justification, a fulfillment through evidence in the strictest sense. Such propositions must not, further, ever be adduced in some other sense than that in which they have been intuitively established.